It is Friday, May 5th. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright, so this past week we got all of our dates and times for E3 and all that jazz and what's going on. Now, of course, the one we want to kind of focus in on is Sony's press conference. So we now know officially it's going to be Monday, June 12th, 6 p.m. PT, 9 p.m. ET. So keep that posted into your calendar. And as always on this channel, right after the show, I'll do a recap and impressions video of like what went down. You can follow at Mystic Ryan, where I will do a live tweet of the entire conference. That'll be all well and good. If you're interested, though, you're going to be able to find on Saturday. It's going to be EA's show. Then Sunday, you're going to be finding Microsoft and Bethesda's, and then we'll follow up on Monday with Sony's. Obviously, we'll do the video for Sony. Sometimes I'll live tweet during the other events, but Sony for sure. Keep that in mind. Something else you might want to keep in mind is that Sony announced that PlayStation VR is in stock again in the US and Canada. So if you are in the market for PlayStation VR, certainly go down to GameStop or Amazon and get yourself a unit, especially because there's a pretty good deal going on where for $400 flat you can get the headset and a PlayStation camera, which you do need the camera to use PlayStation VR, so you're basically getting the $60 camera for free, which is kind of a pretty good deal, more or less. So definitely do that, because I still have been having a very hard time finding one myself. Of course, I have PlayStation VR, but I'm still interested to see how the supply sort of works. And it seems like, yeah, for a long time, you still have. It's been pretty hard pressed to find PlayStation VR in stock. So it's just in time for Farpoint, which I'm sure Sony wanted the unit to be in stock for that. And in terms of Farpoint, here's the thing: at this point, it's so hard for me to promise reviews because it takes me so long to do them. You're still getting the Horizon review. So it's tough for me to say if I could review Farpoint, because I'm sure a lot of people are interested to see more about that game, because it is an original. Not only is it a full-on PlayStation VR game, but it's an original title too, so we're very interested to see how it actually turns out. I'm sure I'll do maybe like a gameplay impressions video or something like that, but I cannot promise a review nowadays. But that's... they want it in time for Farpoint, which is understandable. So, if you remember, last January, sad news came out where Sony announced the closure of Guerrilla Cambridge, which totally sucked. Guerrilla Cambridge at the time just wrapped up development on rigs for PlayStation VR. So we actually there was a recent interview for the art directors of the game. Alex Canaris and Tom Jones was sort of talking about, the sadness of the closure and specifically how they were still working on content for rigs and didn't even realize that the studio was going to be getting shut down. So he said, it was a challenging couple of years. I think we made a great game, which is why it was sad that the studio was shut. We were still working on more stuff for it, getting more levels and more DLC out for the community. The thing that's the saddest, perhaps, is that Riggs never got the chance to grow and go to where we wanted it to be, but it did a great job of pushing VR and setting a benchmark, perhaps, for other developers to follow. But you can't work in the games industry without living with the chance of the studio shutting down. Sony is a company that has to manage its costs effectively. It was a surprise and very sad, obviously, a tough decision for everyone involved, and not one I suspect Sony took lightly. Fortunately, most of the people there have gone on to other things now, but these things happen. It's worth noting that both of these guys went on to do their own thing at an indie studio, and yeah, a lot of people did get their jobs, get new jobs and found a new place to be. Now, I always have some sort of, thoughts regarding this situation, because, well, one thing being, and you can tell right away from these guys, they say it right in the quote. There is always an uncertainty in the games industry when you're working with when you're working at a developer, because it is so tough nowadays, especially when you're working on multi-million-dollar video games. It's very tough to sort of thrive in this industry, and I think even Cliff Bleszinski made a quote either 1 week ago or 2 weeks ago. I wanted to talk about it, but I decided not to. But it was something more along the lines of, you can't really, stay in this industry unless you're an Activision or a Sony. Kind of implying you need to be a big publisher, you need to have a lot of money, you need to have some pretty big developers under your pedigree, and you need that sort of sustainable income and that time and certainly that level of staff that can produce a great game. Now, the thing is, Riggs was actually pretty awesome. I enjoyed Riggs a lot. It's actually a pretty quality virtual reality game if you were to ever try it yourself. Now, it may not be a game for everybody, but Guerrilla Cambridge actually did a great job at making a VR game that worked and felt right, and more importantly, I guess, it just visually, it was great. It put you in that place, and that's always the very important thing about making a VR game. And it's sad that they didn't get to do more with rigs, because you could see the potential there. And certainly with Guerrilla Cambridge's past projects, this was a developer that knew what they were doing. They could make quality games. So at the time, we were just sort of discussing, Sony is a big company that does not make decisions just offhandedly. It was probably, there was a lot of thought that was probably put into it, and at the end of the day, it probably made more sense for them to close them than to keep making games. However, if they were to keep making games, I think that would have been a very good interest for Sony in the fact of having a developer that could probably keep working on virtual reality content. Have this team keep working on rigs, make rigs a big thing, or at least try to. And if it does or does not pan out, get them working on something else, because certainly this developer had that potential. They made great games in the past, and they made a great VR game this time. So that's the thing. You got this hardware, PlayStation VR, and you got a developer that made a really quality game for it. Have them do more of that, and it sucks that they didn't have that opportunity to keep going with it. Now for our main news story, let's talk about the oh-so-curious, and it will happen at some point, just a matter of when, PlayStation 5, as you can clearly see in the title of the video. So, if you remember last week, we were talking about how, and I had initially reported it before the press release came out about Sony's numbers of consoles shipped, and there's their sales and data and all that, and they're at 60 million units shipped. That was confirmed by Sony in their earnings report, and the company is doing just as well as it did for peak profits since 1998, and that's all well and good. But one thing that came out of the Wall Street Journal is that a Capital Securities analyst, Damien Thong, who apparently this guy is credited for correctly predicting the release dates for PlayStation 4 Pro and PS4 Slim, but he is now putting a set target for the next generation of PlayStation, which would be PlayStation 5 presumably. He's saying late 2018. We often dabble in the PS5 discussion, and it really kind of boils down to when it's going to happen. The thing is, whenever we do talk about PS5, we always have that sort of PS4 Pro twist, which is what I always talk to you guys about, which is that you got this mid-cycle update, but I think moving forward, and certainly it's pretty obvious with Microsoft as well, they both kind of came to the same agreement, separately, more or less. They both had, basically Sony and Microsoft both had the same idea of what consoles should turn into, where they update a little bit more frequently, but they're using very easy to develop on architecture, and you can have this forward compatibility where software is going to keep working just moving forward, and you don't have to start the library at zero. So that's always been kind of the twist with the whole PS5 discussion. Now, what's really intriguing to me is not necessarily the date, I guess, anymore. I mean, sure, we all want to know when PlayStation 5 is going to be a reality, and certainly it will be a reality at some point. That's if you have any sort of doubt that PS5 isn't going to be a reality, then certainly you are ridiculous, given the fact that PS4 is still doing phenomenally well. Actually, it's still on track with PS2 rate of sale. It's still outpacing it. No big surprise there. There's even a handy little chart that came out too that kind of shows you like where PS4 is at and how well it's doing. Yeah, it's doing really well. But it's not necessarily the time, I guess, that I'm more, looking forward to now. It's more so the introduction of it. Because now you've got a situation where we have the mid-console PS4 Pro, which a lot of people just did not take the right way whatsoever, and some people still don't seem to understand the whole point of it. And now we got Xbox Scorpio stepping into the ring, which a lot of people are forgiving more or less because the system is substantially more powerful than the Xbox One. So it feels like a much more monumental leap, but at the same time it's probably more or less still going to be an Xbox One, just a souped-up version, and we'll get more info on that once Microsoft reveals Xbox Scorpio in full length at E3 this year, and we'll find out necessarily how their messaging is going to be, but I would assume it's going to be similar to Sony's. It's just going to be vastly more powerful and, capable of doing 4K games. But when you got to sit now, I want to see how they're going to do the actual next leap, because that's the thing. Here's the thing. It's all about nomenclature, more or less, because traditionally console cycles were 5-6 years. We did have a super long one with PS3 360, but the console library would always start at 0. Sometimes they'd offer backwards compatibility, but it would always be this substantial leap in power, and this sort of idea where it's like new games. You can't just take a PS2 game and play it on a PS1. That's not how it works. But now it's like, okay, we're in a situation where they're going forward in a way where it's the same architecture, and in all likelihood, although not realistically, I guess here's the thing. Theoretically, they could say release PlayStation 5, which will still use the same architecture, will still, easily play PS4 games. I think that's not even up for discussion, really, if PS5 is going to have backwards compatibility. I think it's quite obvious that it will because of just how Sony and Microsoft are both approaching things now. So they would really drop the ball if the system did not have backwards compatibility. But you're assuming it does, right? Given the fact that they're putting developers in a situation where games scale to hardware now, so when you put a PS4 game into a PS4, it's going to check if it's a PS4 or a PS4 Pro. If it's a PS4 Pro, you're going to get more performance out of it. So now you're looking at a situation where theoretically you could make a PS5 game that could play on PS4, especially the fact that we have diminishing returns nowadays. And what I mean by that is that the leaps in, graphical fidelity and things between platforms isn't nearly as drastic as it was, say, 10, 15 years ago. Jump from PS1 to PS2 is not nearly the same as the jump from a PS4 to a PS4 Pro. In fact, that jump is so small and minuscule. Granted, it's mid-cycle, but granted, it's so minuscule that you're really only getting extra frame rate and extra performance. And let's be honest, that's the same thing with X1 to Scorpio. It's just way more frames and way more resolution. Sure, you're getting extra texture detail, foliage, things like that, and whatnot. But sometimes it's like that's what I'm saying. Those things are so minute that you really aren't going to, unless you have two TVs next to you and one lesser platform and then the better platform. You're not gonna, just kind of immediately say, oh, this looks way more awesome than the other one. Unless you had them side by side. You kind of get the point I'm getting across here. I'm not really explaining it all that well. But, so you've got that situation, right? So theoretically, that could be a thing where PS5 games could play on PS4. I'm sure they won't do that. That's kind of the other thing that we always talk about with PS4 Pro and the ongoing cycle that Sony and Microsoft will probably start following is that at some point, they'll make a cutoff for developers and say, okay, well, at this point, your game cannot... Your game is allowed to, have this new benchmark, and it doesn't have to run on platform X anymore. You can start developing for platforms Y and up. So with PlayStation 5, it'll be interesting to see how they sort of do that, I guess. Will it be a situation where once PlayStation 5 is out, that's it? If a PS5 game comes out, it's strictly PS5, and yeah, it can play PS4 games, but it'll be strictly PS5. That I would think would be the most, that's probably what's going to happen. But it's weird. You are in a place where Sony and Microsoft could, do it the other way, which would be weird, right? Because that's this thing. It's the nomenclature. You hear PS5, you immediately assume that's the new platform, and is there going to be backwards compatibility? My library's at 0 now. All that. That's what we're used to because that's what the console industry has always been. But it's different now, and so. Introducing PS4 Pro and Microsoft soon introducing Scorpio was an interesting sort of idea, but it'll be even more interesting to see Microsoft and Sony's next iteration of the full-on chronological release of hardware. And this is the situation where you are probably going to get a completely new user interface and completely new features, a drastically different looking box, and of course, you would hope that the power leap would be much greater. Now, let's go back to the release date real quick. This guy's saying late 2018. I think that's a little soon. He is an analyst, so yeah, maybe he has more justifiable credit than me. It just seems too soon to me, but I would say like 2019. Actually, I also think Wedbush Morgan's Michael Pachter said he wouldn't expect Sony or Microsoft to do their next gen in 2018. I think 2019 is more realistic, especially when you want PS4 Pro to be out there for a little bit and Xbox Scorpio to be out there a little bit. I mean, Scorpio's launching late 2017, this holiday season. That thing's clearly going to be at least $499. I'd be shocked if they get it any lower than that. Sony's still at $400. You gotta let these things price drop a little bit, have more people buy Pros and Scorpios, and late 2018 seems rather soon, so I'm not necessarily sure if I agree with that, but that's what I want more than anything else. I want to see how PlayStation 5 and Microsoft's next machine is introduced and how they want to handle that sort of situation with the fact that the process is different now. Those are just some of the news stories I want to talk about with you guys this week. So I got nothing for you this coming weekend. This weekend is my birthday, actually, so I'm going to try and relax a little bit, take it easy, enjoy myself. And then coming Monday is when I will try to start filming the next Let's Play, which honestly I still don't even know what it's going to be. I really just wing it at this point. Or I've been winging it for a while, but I'll hit you guys up on Twitter or whatnot and see what you guys are interested in seeing, and then I'll start filming that soon. So that'll be not this coming Monday, but the Monday after is when we'll have part 1 of whatever it may be. So just keep your eyes peeled for that. Anyway, that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you guys next Friday.